my friends, the Skald began again, his voice deepening now, like the echo of distant thunder. What truly matters is not just what has happened, but what is yet to come. For Conrad's journey was not a simple one of warriors and victories. Oh no. He crossed uncharted seas, faced his own destiny, and saw what few men had the privilege or the burden of witnessing. As we know, he was chosen, not by chance, but by a force beyond our comprehension. And on his journey, Ragnarok itself, the final battle between the gods and the monsters of the world, lay in wait. But the end is no may end, but the beginning of something greater still. He paused, as if weighing each word, his eyes falling on the fire, as if he himself were a shadow of the past, guarding Conrad's secrets. You know, as I do, that Ragnarok is a storm that is coming upon us all. A storm we cannot avoid, no matter how hard we try to escape. And at the heart of that storm, the wolf Fenrir, son of Loki, stands ready to tear through the sky and swallow the sun. He is no mere creature of shadow, but a primordial force forged in the depths of time, a beast whose eyes glow with the promise of the end. The Skald looked at his listeners, his eyes narrowing with the depth of a secret shared only by a few. But Conrad, the chosen one, was unprepared for what was to come. He followed Fenrir's tracks, like a wolf after its prey, to the last trace of the creature. And when he got there, the world seemed to have lost its balance. His village, the home where he grew up, lay destroyed, consumed by an immeasurable force. Giant paw prints, deep as craters, carved the path of death. Fenrir was among us, and he knew that the battle would not be fought with swords and axes alone. Oh no, the real fight was much more complex, and the wolf was just one of many monsters that threatened to swallow the world. The Skald smiled with a touch of bitterness and continued. So Conrad, after losing track of Fenrir, did what any worthy man would do. He prayed to the gods, to the ancient spirits that had guided the warriors before him. His prayer, fragile as a leaf in the wind, was a plea for help. But who could help a man who was already destined to face the end of time? Who but Odin himself, the All-Father, could give him strength for what lay ahead? He set the cup of mead on the ground and stared into the fire, as if he himself was seeing the flames burn in a different way. And then, with the wind carrying his thoughts, Conrad found what he was looking for, a fishing village by the sea. There was nothing grand about it, just simple men who worked hard for a living. But even the humblest villages have their stories to tell. When he arrived, the smell of the sea and the sound of the crashing waves seemed to envelop him in a deceptive tranquility, a momentary peace. But there was an unsettling feeling in the air, as if the wind itself, that ancient messenger of the gods, had brought something else. The sailor. The Skald paused, his eyes darkening as if he himself were immersed in the memory of that night. He leaned forward slightly, as if his next word were laden with a secret of immense weight. The sailor was different. He was no ordinary man. His eyes, deep as a stormy sea, carried the weight of many battles. He looked at Conrad, and it took no word for him to know that the warrior was marked by something more than death. He watched him with the same intensity with which a predator watches its prey. But instead of suspicion, the sailor offered something else, a proposition. The Skald smiled, almost as if he saw the scene unfolding before his eyes. The proposal was simple, but it carried the gravity of the gods themselves. The sailor, his voice as deep as thunder, told Conrad that he must go to the 9 realms and warn the kings. Warn them that Ragnarok had begun, that Fenrir, the beast of destruction, was loose, and that there was no more time to hesitate. The sailor knew that the journey would be long, that the lands Conrad would cross would be infested with unimaginable horrors. But the call was clear, and the future of the world rested on the young Viking's shoulders. The Skald paused, his gaze distant, as if he were visualizing what was happening in each kingdom. Conrad, with the courage that only a true son of Odin could have, accepted the challenge. He knew there was no turning back. that the path would take him across seas, mountains, and kingdoms where kings were at odds, aware of the threat but unable to act. He knew that every warning given, every soul touched by the word of a warrior, could change the fate of the world. And the sailor, with the longship with black sails, guided him towards the first kingdom. It was there that his true journey would begin, and the path of Conrad, the chosen one, would be traced in the stars. The Skald raised a cup and, with an enigmatic smile, looked at his listeners, who were now immersed in the story. The fire crackled, and the wind blew even stronger, as if he himself were a part of this great legend. And then he began to tell about the first kingdom Conrad had seen. The winds cut through the sea furiously, and the longship, with its black sails, cut through the icy waters like an immense beast. Conrad's journey, now accompanied by the mysterious sailor, was just beginning. The sea seemed vast and immense, as if the world itself stretched out to the end of time. The sailor, with his silent presence, gazed at the distant horizon, his eyes fixed on the thin line between the water and the sky. There were no words between him and Conrad. The young warrior knew that the journey would be long and difficult, and the sailor seemed to understand that nothing could be said. Time, however, was relentless, and as the hours passed, the storm that gathered around them became more and more intense. The sailor, with his snow-white hair and a thick beard that seemed to hide more secrets than Conrad could comprehend, had an aura of ancient wisdom. His gaze did not stray from the horizon, as if he were waiting for the right moment to speak. He moved with the precision of a man accustomed to great voyages, yet at the same time he exuded a sense of mystery. The old sailor was not just a man of war. He was a man of the waters, the winds, and the stars. He knew the seas like no other, and his presence was like that of an ancient spirit, guiding Conrad toward a future that was beyond the comprehension of any mortal. As the black sails of the longship stretched in the wind, and the sound of the waves crashing against the hull of the ship filled the silence between them, Conrad could not help but feel a connection with the sailor. He had been chosen for this mission for a reason. The feeling of being part of something greater was palpable. But what exactly did this role entail? He knew that his journey was not just about defeating enemies or conquering territory. No, this was beyond anything he had ever experienced. He had been chosen, but for what? The questions in his mind were as many as the stars in the sky, but the sailor gave no answers. The old man knew, without a doubt, that Conrad would find out for himself in due time. The days dragged on like a long, endless night, and the vastness of the sea seemed to reflect the weight of fate that hung over the two men. During stops to replenish supplies, the sailor shared few words, but when he did, his lessons were like beacons in the darkness. There is no greater honor, Conrad, than to serve the destiny that is given to us, the sailor said one silent night, as the wind howled. We are but instruments in the hands of the gods, and when the storm comes, it asks no permission. It takes us, whether we want it or not. Conrad absorbed every word, understanding that his journey was not just physical, but spiritual. The sailor was more than a guide. He was a figure of great power, someone who had already faced what Conrad had yet to experience. As they voyaged, the seas grew more treacherous, and Fenrir's presence seemed to illumine the air, like a shadow that never left. The old sailor, with his imperturbable calm, guided the longship through these turbulent waters, holding steady on course, as if he knew the worst was yet to come. Finally, after many days of sailing, the longship with its black sails cut through the waters and reached the coast of the first kingdom. The wind was still blowing strong, and the sky was heavy with dark clouds, as if the gods were watching. The sailor, without hesitation, steered the ship towards the shore, where the land seemed more arid and cold. Conrad disembarked first, feeling the hard ground beneath his feet. The smell of the earth was different, saltier and denser. He looked out at the vast field ahead, where the walls of the kingdom rose. It was not the kind of kingdom he had expected. Immense, but with a feeling of oppression, as if it were being watched. The city gates were closed, and the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard behind the walls. It was not a welcoming kingdom, but a place that breathed in constant tension. The fortress seemed impenetrable, and Conrad felt a chill run down his spine. The sailor, without saying a word, led Conrad to the doors, which slowly opened, revealing the entrance to a royal court that seemed to be under constant surveillance. Inside the great hall, the king sat on an iron throne, with an imposing presence. His thick beard and silver hair gave him the appearance of a veteran, someone who had faced countless battles. The king's eyes were deep, as if he already knew that something was about to happen, but did not know exactly what. Conrad advanced, the weight of his mission growing with each step. As he approached the king, he felt the monarch's penetrating gaze, as if he were being analyzed in his entirety. "Are you the man who comes to warn of Ragnarok?" the king asked, his voice echoing in the great hall. The room was cold, and the silence that followed was palpable. Conrad knelt before the king, feeling the magnitude of this moment. But at the same time, he knew that nothing would be easy. Believe it or not, convincing a king that the end of times was imminent was no simple task. "Yes, sir. Ragnarok is coming, and Fenrir the wolf is already tearing through the sky with his sharp teeth. We can wait no longer. The end is at our door." Conrad's voice was firm, but within himself he felt a growing doubt. How could he convince a man who had spent his entire life facing invasions and battles that the end of the world was about to occur, and that he should act? The king looked at him with a cold expression, and for a moment no one dared to move. The silence was absolute. "Do you truly believe that, warrior?" the king asked, his voice as cold as the room around him. "You came to me with these words, but do you not see that the kingdom is at peace? Do you not see that the lands are safe? How can I believe that Ragnarok is real?" Conrad remained silent, feeling the pressure increasing with each passing second. The king was right in his doubt. How could anyone believe such a grand, terrifying story without seeing the evidence? But Conrad's gaze remained steady. He knew what was happening, knew what was coming. That was when the king, with a slow movement, rose from his throne and walked to a nearby table. He took out a long, thin sword with runes engraved on its steel. He held it up before Conrad, and the warrior looked at it with respect. It was a king's sword, forged for ancient and bloody wars. What you are asking, warrior, is not something simple. You cannot go around announcing that the end has come without further ado. But if you truly believe this, and if this is what your destiny demands of you, then take this sword, raise it before men, and show them that you have been authorized to act in the name of the kingdom. Use it to walk through the barracks, through the cities, and warn them that the end is coming." Conrad took up the sword, feeling the weight of responsibility, the weight of the world's future in his hands. He knew the journey would be long and full of challenges. But as he raised the sword before his allies, he knew he was authorized to act, that with this sword he was fighting for the survival of all. The king watched in silence as Conrad withdrew, now with the sword of a king, ready for his mission. Conrad's destiny was finally being decided. With the king's sword in his hands and the weight of destiny upon his shoulders, Conrad set out from the gates of the great city, his heart firm but his mind filled with questions and uncertainties. The kingdom, with its vast lands, was too vast to be traversed quickly, and he knew his mission was urgent. Ragnarok would wait for no one, and the wolf Fenrir was drawing ever closer. His mission was clear, to warn all the kingdoms, to traverse the barracks, the villages, and the forgotten lands, and to ensure that all were ready for what was to come. The king's sword hung at his side, and with each step he took, the runes on its blade glowed with a faint light, as if confirming the authority he now held. Conrad was no longer just an ordinary warrior. He was now the messenger of a destiny that no man could escape. The first few days of his journey were lonely, crossing frozen fields and dense forests. Snow covered everything, and the wind cut through his skin like sharp blades. The loneliness of the path was profound, but Conrad did not let it shake him. The weight of the mission kept him going. He knew that if he failed, the end would come for everyone. Fear of the unknown consumed him every day, but his determination kept him moving forward. Conrad knew that the first step was to reach the nearby barracks, where the soldiers and officers of the kingdom were located. The villages along the way were simple, with wooden houses and thatched roofs. The people were simple, but the marks of war were on every face he met. Empty looks, people with traces of fatigue and fear. The shadow of war hung over everyone, but no one knew that the true end was about to arrive. In each village he visited, the story was the same. The people were aware of the external threats, the invasions and looting that occurred on the borders of the kingdom, but no one spoke of Ragnarok. The idea of a cataclysmic end, of an apocalypse involving the gods themselves, seemed like a distant legend, something that might never happen. But Conrad knew he could not rest until everyone knew, until every last man in every village and barracks had been warned. In the barracks, where the soldiers were on constant alert, Conrad's reaction was different. The commander of each post, upon hearing Conrad's warning, looked at him with a mixture of distrust and skepticism. How could a simple warrior arrive with such news? How could someone so young, with an unknown past, speak of Ragnarok? But Conrad's sword, with the king's runes engraved on it, spoke louder than his words. However, each warning he gave was a struggle. He was not accepted immediately. In each barracks, he faced hard looks, questioning, and distrust. Even with the king's sword, most of the officers doubted the seriousness of his words. Some laughed, others just shook their heads, thinking he was delirious. But Conrad was undeterred. He knew what he was saying was the truth, and he was willing to fight for it. It was in one of these villages, on the road between the barracks, that Conrad had his first real battle. As he entered a small, isolated village, he realized something was wrong. The smell of fire and smoke hung in the air, and screams of panic could be heard in the distance. When he reached the central square, he saw a group of thieves looting the village's storehouses. The thieves were well armed, but they were not experienced warriors. They were simple men in search of wealth, with no honor or respect for life. When they saw Conrad, with his armor covered in snow and the king's sword gleaming at his waist, the leader of the thieves laughed mockingly. "You, a simple warrior, think you can stop us?" the leader shouted, brandishing a rusty sword. "This is the end of the line for you, my friend. No one will stand between us and the loot." Conrad did not respond with words. He had faced greater monsters than these men. With one swift movement, he drew his sword and advanced, the sound of the blade cutting through the air echoing in the square. He was not here to kill without reason, but to protect the innocent. Each blow he struck was precise, efficient, but with a slight touch of mercy. The fight did not last long. Within minutes, the thieves were on the ground, disarmed and defeated. After the fight, Conrad approached the leader of the thieves, still conscious and bound. "Tell the others," Conrad said, his voice cold and implacable, "that the world is on the brink of its end. Ragnarok is approaching, and the last loot will be our own end." The man looked at Conrad in fear, the words trembling on his lips. He knew there was no way to fight against a destiny as great as this. Conrad left the thieves tied up and went on his way. He knew the trials were not over, but what else could he face? Fate guided him, and he had to reach the other kingdoms. But he felt the weight of responsibility increasing with each step. Conrad continued his journey, now more urgent than ever. The villages, barracks, and watch posts were full of news of a growing threat. But doubt still lingered. The people listened fearfully, but did not understand the magnitude of what was coming. When he finally reached the last city in the kingdom, he was exhausted but determined. He found the kingdom's officials, a council of elders and generals, gathered to discuss the coming war with the neighboring peoples. But what Conrad had to say was not about a simple war. It was about the end of the world. Kings, commanders, and men of honor, he said, raising his sword with force, "Ragnarok approaches. Fenrir, the wolf, breaks through the skies. The end is coming, and you, all of you, must prepare yourselves." There was silence in the room. Conrad's sword gleamed in the torchlight, and the sound of metal clashing against metal echoed in everyone's minds. The generals and advisors were in shock, but something in Conrad's words made many of them finally accept the truth of his words. And so, after much resistance, Conrad received permission from the council to continue his mission. With a sword in hand, he raised it before his allies as a symbol of the truth he brought. He was authorized to travel through the barracks, cities, and towns, warning everyone of what was to come. His mission was far from over, but he felt the strength of a king's sword, and with it, the responsibility to save the world. Conrad returned to the sailor, his back heavy with the responsibility he now bore. Each kingdom he visited, each soul touched by his words, made him feel closer to the destiny the gods had set for him. The king's sword still shone with the strength of the authority granted, and Conrad knew that, despite being a warrior, his mission was greater than any combat he had ever fought. It was no longer about conquering lands or vanquishing enemies. It was about ensuring the survival of the world in the face of the greatest threat the gods had ever known, Ragnarok. The sailor, who had been waiting silently on the shore where the longship was anchored, looked at Conrad with a look that mixed approval and apprehension. He knew that Conrad's journey was far from over, but he also knew that the young warrior needed to prepare for what was to come. The sailor, as always, remained enigmatic, but his presence was now more important than ever. He was Conrad's guide, and they both knew that the road ahead would be full of trials. "The kingdoms have heard your words, Conrad," the sailor said, his voice low and grave, as if he had shared ancient secrets. "But time is short. Fenrir grows stronger every day, and the destruction he brings is immeasurable. Every kingdom you visit, every battle you win, is a fight against what is to come." Conrad nodded, aware of what awaited him. With a king's sword at his waist and his heart filled with determination, he climbed aboard the longship, ready to visit the 7 kingdoms that were still at the mercy of Fenrir's primordial force. Conrad's first stop was Jotunheim, the land of the giants, a cold and wild region where the forces of nature seemed to rule with an iron fist. The sea that led them there was rough, the waves violent as if trying to push them away, but the sailor, with his experience, guided the longship skillfully. Jotunheim was a place of stark and terrifying beauty, where giants of ice and stone lived in imposing castles carved into the mountains. The air was thick with an ancient tension, as if every rock and tree were watching silently as a world prepared for its end. Conrad met the leader of the giants, a colossal being with gray skin and eyes as bright as diamonds. The giant, despite his ferocious appearance, listened to Conrad's words attentively. "Ragnarok, you say?" the giant asked, his voice shaking the earth. "The gods no longer control fate. The giants have always known the end would come, but we are not responsible. Fenrir is the key." After an intense negotiation, in which the giant offered Conrad the right to pass through his realm, he was allowed to travel through Jotunheim, delivering his message. But the environment he found himself in was dark and unforgiving. Conrad felt the weight of impending doom, for even the giants seemed to be on the verge of collapse. After leaving Jotunheim, Conrad traveled to Alfheim, the land of the elves, known for their skill with magic and their mastery of light. The sea was calm, and the sky opened up to a brilliant blue as they reached the shores of Alfheim. The elven cities were beautiful, with ethereal architecture and gardens that bloomed with impossible beauty. But behind the beauty, there was a sense of unease. The elves, known for their connection to mystical forces, had sensed the danger. The leader of the elves, a being with silver hair and sparkling eyes, greeted Conrad with a grave expression. "You are right to warn us, warrior. The war of the gods is coming. Fenrir, the wolf, is only the beginning. But what can we do against the end of times?" In Alfheim, Conrad had to face a series of trials. First, he was tested by the magic of the elves, who tried to ascertain his loyalty and true intentions. He passed the challenges, demonstrating his strength of character and determination. Finally, the elven leader gave him a magical amulet, a symbol of their faith, and Conrad set out, knowing that the elves would do what they could to help, even if their strength was limited. Vanaheim, the realm of the Vani, was the home of the gods of fertility and wisdom. Unlike the other realms, Vanaheim was a place of abundance, where the fields were always green and the harvests were always bountiful. The journey to Vanaheim was uneventful, and Conrad felt a sense of serenity as he entered the realm. However, upon his arrival, he found the council of the Vani gods divided. Some wanted to take immediate action against Ragnarok, while others were skeptical. The leader of Vanaheim, a goddess with golden skin and hair like green grass, explained to Conrad that the power of the Vani was weakened, for they had lost much of their former strength. Ragnarok, which was supposed to be a battle of all the gods, was now beyond the reach of any one realm. Nevertheless, Conrad managed to convince the Vani to help in the resistance, and with their support, he set out with greater confidence to the next realms. Conrad's journey through the other realms was marked by different challenges. In Svartalfheim, the land of the Dark Elves, he faced betrayals and hidden battles in the shadows, struggling to make his voice heard among the dark beings who ruled there. In Niflheim, the land of eternal ice, he faced an army of undead, having to use his skill and cunning to defeat them. Muspelheim, with its eternal flames and fiery creatures, was one of the most difficult realms to traverse, but Conrad faced its beasts with bravery. As he traversed these realms, Fenrir grew larger by the day, and signs of his doom began to appear everywhere. The wolf was closer to breaking through the heavens, and the earth trembled beneath his power. Conrad sensed his presence, and knew that his time was running out. After traversing all 8 realms, Conrad managed to gather support, but the task was not complete. Ragnarok was still an imminent event, and the wolf Fenrir was growing stronger by the day. Conrad knew that the next realms would be even more difficult to traverse, but he was determined. The king's sword was still with him, and the confidence he had gained in the 7 realms now guided him. Before leaving for Asgard, Conrad made one last stop in the lands that connected the lesser kingdoms to the greater ones. He observed the vast landscapes and the distant skies, where the stars seemed to shine with a different intensity, as if they knew what was to come. The sailor, who had always guided him, looked at him with a serious expression. "You are prepared, Conrad. The world is on the brink of destruction, but you have the power to change everyone's destiny. Don't stop. Keep up the fight." With these words, Conrad left, knowing that his journey was far from over. Ragnarok was closer than ever, but he was now the chosen man, the warrior who would lead the kingdoms to face the end of times. The Skald stood up with the weight of the story on his shoulders, like a man who carries the burden of all legends, and all eyes around the fire were fixed on him. The night was silent, except for the crackling of the flames, which danced as if they themselves were listening to the words of the storyteller. The sound of the wind, the rustling of the leaves, and the murmur of the trees seemed to be part of the magic of that moment. The Skald, with the empty cup in his hands, leaned forward, and the fire illuminated his face, reflecting in his eyes a mysterious glow. "But, my friends," the Skald began, his voice lower, more serious. He paused, and silence fell. Everyone was waiting for the next step in the story, Conrad's journey, now more imminent than ever. Conrad, the warrior chosen by Odin, did not stop. He did not give up. With the king's sword in hand, he crossed the realms and faced monsters that only exist in nightmares. He warned the kings, the warriors, and every soul he met along the way, telling them, "Ragnarok is coming, and Fenrir breaks through the heavens." The Skald paused, as if measuring the gravity of his words. He knew, as we all know, that the end is not a legend. The end is real, and it is among us. The wolf, son of Loki, grows larger every day, and the earth trembles with his strength. But Conrad, he did not stop. He did not falter. He carried the message of the gods. The Skald raised his cup, his gaze serious and contemplative. But now, my friends, Conrad's journey was about to change. He had crossed desolate lands, faced the forces of shadow, and warned the realms. But the last realm he must reach, the greatest of all, that, my friends, is something fate itself is in store for him. He took a sip of mead, as if the last breath of that story had mingled with the nectar of the gods. The sound of the mead being poured into the cup seemed to echo in the night, heavy with the weight of what was to come. Conrad knew that to complete his quest, he would need to go beyond the known realms, where no common man would dare go, for he knew that somewhere in the lands of the stars, in the heights where the gods dwell, there is a city where time and space intertwine, a city that watches over the world below, where kings and gods gather. The Skald paused again, his eyes narrowing as if he saw farther than the reach of human vision. But what will he find there, my friends? What do the gods truly expect of a man like him? The Skald leaned back, his face lit by the flames of the fire. The atmosphere around him seemed to have changed, denser, more charged. The sound of the crackling flames seemed louder, and the wind that passed through the trees seemed to carry a distant message. Conrad, my friend, was about to enter what some call the heart of the world. He did not know what awaited him, but he knew that he had been chosen for something far greater than he could have imagined. The place where he would go, where the gods walk among mortals, was beyond all dreams, beyond all legend. The Skald raised his cup once more, his eyes shining with the fire of history. And there, my friends, is where Conrad will find his true destiny. For the doors of that realm open only to the chosen, and what will he do when he stands before the gods, who have the power to destroy all that we know? That, my friends, will be told next night. With an enigmatic smile, the Skald sat back down, the sound of mead dripping from the goblet as the flames continued to dance, seemingly eager for more. But until then, my friends, stay with the heat of the flame and the chill of the wind, and remember, the end is coming, and Odin's chosen is still on his journey. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues,